right, thanks for coming, everyone, to the Brit Technology Impact Series session today with Steve Hallowell of MuleSoft. We've been talking a lot about making decisions based on data and how data is really changing the way that organizations make decisions. And one of the challenges that always needs to be overcome is, we have, especially for legacy companies, overcoming these barriers of connecting those systems so that we can use that data across the enterprise. MuleSoft is the leader in that enabling that to happen. So we're really excited to have Steve, who is probably one of the only three different Dartmouth degree holder people I know. It's pretty fascinating. He's had a career in enterprise as well, working at I guess it's, should we call it Oracle, Responsus and Oracle prior to going to MuleSoft. So please join me in welcoming Steve Hallowell of MuleSoft.
Thanks, guys. I'm going to start off just a quick video here to set the stage.
My name is Simon Post. I'm the Group CIO of Dixons Carphone. We're the UK's biggest consumer electronics retailer. Digital transformation in retail, particularly if you're a bricks and mortar player like us rather than a pure play like Amazon, is really about how do we change our in-store processes in many ways to make it feel a bit more like the web. The Honeybee platform that is powered by MuleSoft allows us to have a completely new customer journey in our stores, which has both interaction between the customer and a colleague with a tablet, giving consistency of journey to the customer, but also helping the customer understand that in a very complex environment, they got the product that they wanted. Dixons Carphone built this Honeybee platform to solve the problem that we had around digital transformation and digital journeys, and it's worked so well for us that we've now actually become a software business, and we're selling this on to multiple customers. If we were using other technologies which we've used in the past, we've never been as efficient as we are now with MuleSoft. We've got a 10x, in fact slightly more than a 10x improvement in productivity, and we just deliver stuff much faster. The Honeybee platform with our own stores has had quite a significant impact. So our conversion is up 36%, our NPS is up 20%, and our average basket size is better. Honeybee is currently deployed in the UK, Germany, Canada, and shortly in the US. Actually, at a transactional level, we've got one of our customers who wants 10,000 API calls a second. I mean, this is pretty big volume capability that we're looking for, and so far MuleSoft has delivered all of that. The scale of the platform that MuleSoft is helping us power is, with all these connections across the geographies that we work in, means that we're maintaining hundreds of APIs which change on a frequent basis, and we don't control when those changes occur. And MuleSoft gives us not only the ability to maintain that volume of APIs, but also to respond quickly when one of our partners makes a change. MuleSoft are our core partner in building our application networks. And I would describe that as both the connections that we have to the outside world, and we maintain a lot of them because we've got lots of carriers, fraud agencies, credit checking agencies that we talk to, but also internally to our checking stock and all the things that we need to do. And what Mule has allowed us to do is to have a sort of a component view of that. When we want to create a new customer journey, we just assemble those things into a customer journey using essentially a drag and drop interface. And that allows us to very quickly create and modify complex customer journeys. So what used to take us 12 months now takes us 3 months. That's a massive win in a digital world that is changing constantly.
I want to keep this super interactive. This is your time. It's for your benefit. So if you have questions, you want to take the conversation in different directions, let me know, and I'll be happy to do that. So just very briefly, a little bit more about MuleSoft. I joined in 2014. We've had some pretty significant revenue growth in the last several years. We went public in March, and we think we're just getting going. As you look at the value created by some of the significant software companies out there, there's a heck of a lot more value created after IPO than pre-IPO, and that's what we're all focused on right now. Patrick introduced me briefly, but just in terms of kind of where I've come from, after college here, I started in strategy consulting at the Monitor Group in Cambridge, now part of Deloitte. Was at an early stage venture capital firm investing in primarily B2B SaaS companies for a few years after that. Came back here to Tuck. Decided I wanted to get my hands dirty as part of the team who are actually building these companies. Moved out to San Francisco, joined Responsys, which was then later acquired by Oracle after a public offering there, and then joined MuleSoft a few years after that. So Daniel and I had the pleasure of working together at Responsys, which was good fun. So that's kind of briefly about me, and I've got another session after this for those of you who are interested in careers in growth stage companies to talk more about that. This one I want to focus more on some of the technology trends, kind of what's going on out there. I think every company these days is needing to be a digital company. Software is touching every part of these businesses. For you guys as leaders in whatever function you go into, whatever your background, I think understanding some of where technology both helps and hinders that transformation, and being conversant in that and understanding how you can help drive that forward and use it to help accomplish whatever goals you're trying to do is I think a pretty useful thing, and hope that my talk today really sets some of the background for that. So kind of three things we're going to look at today. One is organizing for innovation. What is it that companies need to do if we're trying to be agile, trying to respond to rapidly changing demands? How do companies organize themselves to allow this to happen? And this is organizing in part from a people standpoint and in part from a technology standpoint. What's so hard about this? I think it can be easy for folks who have grown up with information at their fingertips and very easy to access, and you guys pull data into spreadsheets and analyze it all the time. It seems pretty straightforward. It gets a lot harder when you get into some of these companies for a variety of reasons. And then some of MuleSoft's perspectives to what we're taking to market in terms of how to accelerate this and make this easier. So, as I mentioned, I think that you all know this, that technology is every part of a business technology touches in some way. There's very little that matters to a business that you can try to get done that doesn't have a technology component to it in some way, shape, or form. And an interesting story from Unilever. Unilever is a very significant customer of ours. They had a moment where they kind of woke up with a little bit of surprise a couple years ago when they figured out that when they were trying to take a new product to market, they're doing this all the time, some new consumer good, they could get the manufacturing set up, they could configure the supply chain, they could configure the distribution in about 6 months. It took them twice that to configure the digital version of that product. So everything it took from a systems perspective to support that, you would think that the digital piece would be a lot faster, that the digital team would be leading innovation. Jane Moran, the CIO there, kind of woke up and said, holy crap, I'm the bottleneck. The guys who are building machinery can do it faster than I can. And that clearly that's not just Unilever that's struggling with that. There's a lot of companies out there who are struggling with that same issue. Before I go here, who here in the room, hopefully I'm going to get some help from a couple of people here. Who has a technical background? Who has been involved in writing software or working with software in a reasonably close way? A few people. That's awesome. Who has been involved in a software company of some sort? Very cool. And who maybe has been maybe in a consulting situation or internally in a spot where you've needed to analyze data that comes from multiple different parts of the business? Somebody tell me about that experience. What was that like to try to obtain that data, make sense of it, and then start getting some useful insight out of it?
Pain.
Why?
Because it was in multiple different sources, maintained by different people, varying quality of data, and you didn't necessarily have a place to join it. Not everyone could match. You have to go to a lot.
How long did this take to kind of go from, hey, I think we have something we should look at, let's go get some data to figure it out, to actually getting to a solution?
Anywhere from like a day and a half to 3 months.
Yeah, it's super common. I assume the other you guys have had kind of similar experiences. And so you compound that by every decision a company is trying to make. And we all know companies are under a ton of pressure. They're trying to move quickly. They're trying to do things rapidly. every decision they're trying to make, they run into that problem. And it's really hard. When I look at why it's hard, this is when you think about a business, you think about the different functions that make up a business. There's different things that people are trying to do within these functions. So you kind of look at these different puzzle pieces in different domains. And you might like to think that a company has nice, neat little boxes, that there's a piece of HR that does this function, and there's a piece of manufacturing that does this function, and they all kind of align nicely. Well, we generally know that that's actually not the case, that as this has built up over time, when you kind of look at what's underneath the covers, there's kind of a mess, and it's not a mess that's really been designed with a lot of intentionality. And in fact, when you try to bring that mess together and you're kind of gluing that mess, trying to get, the problem that you dealt with was probably trying to get something out of it, one piece over here and one piece over here and another piece over here. And you had the benefit of doing it in sort of a custom way that didn't have to be systematized. Now when you think about trying to release a mobile app to consumers that similarly draws on data from a number of different places, and when you look at most of the consumer experience mobile apps that you might use, it's not just a single system they're drawing from. It might be a mainframe plus Salesforce plus SAP. And these things just were never designed to actually play nicely together. And so what you wind up with is, if you've ever been to or traveled through a developing country and you look at the electrical wires in a city, and it's just this crazy mess, and you think about what if you ever had to make a change. If the power goes down and you wanted to figure out, well, where was the issue? Somebody cuts a wire, well, which one did I cut? And try to go back and fix that. I mean, that's kind of the pain that the IT organizations in these companies are living in every day, that their technology infrastructure, while they have software packages that kind of do their thing, so if I'm operating within the world of Salesforce, it's pretty well defined. Once I get outside of that, it was usually some guy 10 years ago did a pretty quick and dirty way of writing some code to move data from Salesforce to SAP. And so if you got to go change it, it's a massive pain. And companies talk about it taking months to simply add a field to some of their, database or something like that. Just adding a field because they don't know when it's going to break downstream. What's compounding that, that was a problem 10 years ago. It's become an even bigger problem because of forces you guys are very familiar with, of moving to the cloud, mobility, shadow IT, people going off, and now the sales group can kind of go do their own thing and bring in their own software. SaaS. That makes this environment much, much more complex and much harder to manage. So businesses, if they want to be able to change quickly, if they want to be able to respond to forces they're seeing, they'd like to be able to change and reconfigure their components. Hey, I want to upgrade this thing that's getting old. I want to swap something new in. This piece isn't working, or I built this. Can I go use it over here? Intuit is one of our customers, and they obviously know a lot about taxes and doing taxes. They wanted to, they also do payroll. They wanted to make it easier for people to calculate the tax implications of payroll changes. What they were able to do, because the module for how do you calculate taxes was built in sort of a nice standalone way, they were then able to bring that in and plug that into their payroll group and reuse that piece, as opposed to let's go build it from the ground up. So it saves a lot of time in that process. All these forces that you're seeing out there in the market are making this much harder. And for those of you who aren't, maybe haven't seen this at as close range, almost every IT organization today are in the process of rebuilding themselves. They started decades ago. What they started with is no longer working as well as it should be. They know it's slowing themselves down. And so it's just this massive sea change in terms of where technology is deployed, how it's deployed. It's creating a lot of change that also creates a lot of complexity. So if you can become a part of a company that's driving that change and supporting that change, it's obviously a pretty good place to be. And mobile enablement, especially because all of you as consumers expect things to work well. You expect them to innovate. You expect them to respond to your needs. Anybody who's been in kind of front-end development world knows that best practice today, you're launching new features on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, even a daily basis in some cases. And yet the pace of change for traditional IT has been usually measured in 6 months or a year to get a feature in the queue and be able to actually go build it. So this massive disconnect within a company in terms of the speed at which different parts of the business want to operate. So when we look at why, so all this means that anything you're trying to do that involves technology, which probably means anything you're trying to do, period, is going to take too long. It's going to be too hard. And there's kind of 3 reasons that we focus on in terms of what's driving this. One is the silos of data that we've heard about, that the systems just were never designed to talk to each other. And back in the day, it used to be the kind of the Oracle sales pitch was just buy Oracle. You get it all, and it works, and we'll solve making it work together. I don't think anybody wants to do everything in their business entirely on Oracle these days. It just makes no sense whatsoever. The systems are hard to work with. Any of the folks that have done some coding, have you ever had to work directly with an Oracle or SAP or a mainframe? Tell me about that experience. What was that like?
Well, all of those database systems will have very different database management services. Like their table structure is going to be different, their APIs are going to be different. The system probably update at different periods of time, so it might actually have redundant. Like you might actually have data that's not even concurrent at the same time. And some systems, like for example, payroll has historically been part of SAP, so you'll have to work with the data in a certain format that comes from SAP, and you'll have to do additional operations, as well, like ETL operations, to basically convert it back to something that you can talk to with Oracle or something. So it's unnecessary work.
How much training do you need to have to effectively work with that software?
You'll need like at least a couple of years of experience with both of these softwares to make sure that you can understand them together.
And I'll tell you, guys like that are hard to come by in the market. Companies can't hire enough people that have that skill set. And so skill bottlenecks become a real issue. The other thing is, let's say you're trying to release a mobile app that wants to draw data from multiple different systems, the odds of finding one person that actually knows all those systems are basically 0. And so you wind up waiting for the Oracle expert to free up and getting in his queue, and that, again, lengthens these timelines and make things take a lot longer than they ought to. The other big issue here is centralized control. This gets to an interesting organizational dynamic that most organizations, central IT, they want to control everything. And they're kind of measured, they're more focused on how do we not break things than how do we innovate, because their first responsibility is controlling the financial transactions of a business. Can we recognize revenue? Can we report data to the street? Can't mess that up. So change is a real problem for them. And it's with good intent. These are things that are very important to not mess up. And so historically they said, hey, we want to control everything. We want to own it. We want to make sure that, again, we don't mess anything up. Now, obviously, if you're working on the user experience for a website, the downside of making a mistake somewhere is actually a lot less. That's a place where you do want to be able to innovate quickly. Move fast and break things, as Facebook would say. And so again, you wind up with some real tension there. And one of our theses is that too much centralized control is one of the other things that makes it much harder to innovate. Not least because the folks that actually have the ability to make the changes are usually very far from the problem they're trying to solve. The front end, the salesperson, the business development person, the marketing person that has the insight of they know what we want to change and what the problem is, it's just a long telephone game to get to the people that can actually make the change happen and to get those things communicated clearly enough. And so just to illustrate this in a little bit more detail, and I think this is helpful, especially for those of you who haven't been in the situation of building this stuff, which I never was. Let's say you wanted to build a web application that provided real-time order status and order history to a sales team when they're out engaging customers. Very common type of use case. You've got some inventory data in SAP. You've got customer data in SAP and Salesforce. to start solving this problem, the first thing you've got to do is bring my customer data from these different databases together. And so usually you get a developer to go write some code to do that. Then you want to bring order history together. So again, I go and I write some more code. Order status, I go and I write some more custom code. And eventually I build an API for the web app that sits on top of that. Okay, reasonable, pretty common way to solve it. What happens then, 6 months later, when I say, you know what, the web application wasn't enough. Now we need to build a mobile app. Well, the guys that built the original stuff, they probably were working for a system integrator, and they've moved off, and they're on a different project, and nobody knows what they did. They weren't incented. Nobody cared about how much they documented this code. It's, somebody else will look at it, it'd be hard for them to figure out. So typical solution is it's going to be harder for us to look at that again and figure out what it is and try to use it. We're just going to leave that sitting where it is. We're going to go build all that same stuff all over again. And so this project that should have actually been pretty quick winds up taking a long time. And this is extremely common within these organizations. When you look at that on the scale of a company as a whole, and again, I talked about that spaghetti mess, I mean, this stuff strangles companies in their ability to innovate. Every new thing they add, it gets harder and harder and harder to make changes. So one of the things that MuleSoft is trying to do is using APIs to enable a solution to this. When you think about when the internet, when the web first came about and HTML became this very standard way that anybody could use to communicate, RESTful APIs, a modern API, can do the same thing for applications. Has anybody ever worked with the Google Maps API or a Facebook API? Or something similar? So tell me about that. What was that like to work with?
I mean, I'm just doing super basic stuff.
So are you a particularly technical guy?
No, not really.
So you're not a very technical guy. You have less training, it sounds like, than your colleague. Is that right?
Assumedly.
Were you able to do something somewhat useful with that API?
What's that?
Were you able to do something somewhat useful with that API?
Yeah, for my purposes, I think it was basically something you would call the API. Like you could type in, I imported a bunch of addresses of like universities around the world. You could search for it, and then it would return back to latitude and longitude.
So the awesome thing about kind of this sort of modern era of APIs means that you can take somebody with, it sounds like, not a ton of technical training, look it up, never talk to Google, and pretty quickly figure out how to make some good use out of it. And what these companies have done is they've taken the time to publish good instructions of how to use it. Also, the technology is a format that is just much more easily understandable and easily consumable and can be standard across any of these things. And so once you have that, why shouldn't it be just as easy to access any kind of data within your company that you want to get to using the same way as it is to use that Google Maps API? The reality is, as we heard, it's much, much harder today, but using well-designed APIs, it should be an awful lot easier. And so we see this modern API as a key enabler to a different way of doing things for companies. That it enables them to shift to a focus of, I'll come back to that in a second, it shifts from a focus of, rather than central IT, hey, come to us, we're going to do everything for you, we're going to go make it happen, and then we're going to give you the result. It instead turns central IT into somebody who can build things that are designed for other people to be able to use. So here's some things that we'll give you a set of building blocks and empower other people in the business to go out there and go use it. It's kind of like, if you think about it, in many companies, marketing wants to control the message and maybe the presentations their salespeople are giving to some degree. If you said that every presentation that anybody gave to the outside world had to be produced by somebody in the marketing organization, you'd never get anything done. There wouldn't be enough bandwidth to do it. Instead, what marketing does is they put together a template that's well designed and easy to use, and there's some key slides that anybody can draw from, and they'll give it to you and allow you to go use that. They're giving you a set of assets that are controlled in certain ways, but that you can then innovate on top of. And we're trying to do the same thing with the IT organization. The other big piece here is the security component. One of the reasons why people would be hesitant to do this in the past is like, I can't just give the keys over to anybody, they might break stuff. Well, the nice thing about APIs is that you can manage on each one of those, say who gets to use it, what can they do with it, and control permissions in a much more granular way, which starts to enable, we said we've got certain things in the business that need to have very long rev cycles and turn over very slowly. Okay, well, if I build a nice design building block on that, that might turn over very slowly. But some of the building blocks I build on top of that can change much more quickly and have much more agile governance around them. So I'm able to tune the governance and security that I need to the level of the organization that we're working with. And so what this becomes is what we call an application network, where it should be just as easy to plug a new application into the landscape of a company as it is to plug an appliance into the wall. So when I plug my laptop into a power outlet, I don't take the cover off the thing, undo the wiring, and start wiring my laptop into that. I mean, that's kind of the equivalent of what happens in IT today. I don't care about the voltage. I don't care about the plug. My iPhone needs 5 volts. My laptop needs something different. I'm traveling and it's 220 versus 110. It just figures it out. And that's kind of what the MuleSoft software is trying to do, is to enable it to just kind of figure out what the environment is, put things in a very standardized format, so that you now can easily configure and reconfigure what you're doing. And it's something that, for any of you who have heard of something called SOA, Service-Oriented Architecture, this is a concept that was popular in the early 2000s. Very similar logic behind it. It was, hey, let's build things in pieces and allow people to use it. There were a couple of problems with it. One is that they never focused on this usability component. So you'd be a real expert in how to use the software that enabled SOA. You had to really know what you were doing, have quite a bit of training, which then created further bottlenecks. It also became kind of a science project. That it was typically a small group of architects in the company who had this sort of pie-in-the-sky vision of a perfect architecture. They'd spend years whiteboarding this stuff out and mapping it and not actually deliver value to the business. Now, with respect to anybody who's involved in that, some of these were done really well, but many were not. One of the neat things about what we're doing at MuleSoft is it can emerge much more organically. You don't have to architect the whole darn thing. For a couple of these examples here, let's say you're building that mobile app, so in the upper left-hand corner, kind of like our example previously, where I'm trying to connect Salesforce and SAP to a mobile app. Well, once I learn how to connect to SAP and get certain types of product data out of SAP, that can become something that anytime I need to get product data out of SAP, I just use that thing again. If I am aggregating that customer data, so now I have this thing that says, I'm going to look across all sources of customer data, I know where to find that, that now becomes an entity that I can go back and reuse. And so every project, you build some pieces that are new, you reuse some things that can be reused, and all of a sudden you get this thing starting to blossom and actually taking technical debt and pain out of the process, making it simpler and easier, instead of each project making it harder and harder. Yeah?
So I'm just trying to make sure I fully understand this. It sounds like MuleSoft is basically it used a lot of microservices to do this. My question is each application of MuleSoft company specific, or like based on what their infrastructure is, or are you trying to standardize, like kind of fix the problem and then put MuleSoft on top?
Yeah, good question. So, and what you talked about in terms of microservices are just the idea of, rather than building kind of big honking pieces of software, build little bits that you can interchange. And so MuleSoft there are certain things that we have that are standardized to everybody. So for instance, an SAP connector that knows how to connect to SAP. There's a lot of things, if you're doing this, about how do you authenticate, what's the security protocol, what are the data structures, that it just are common and it knows how to do that and makes that a lot easier, so you don't have to build that separately each time. But in reality, we're selling a development toolkit that we have a bunch of pieces that make it a lot faster and easier But then each company, basically develops applications with us on top of that that actually do the connecting of the bits. And so it abstracts away a lot of that complexity, but we don't have sort of the out-of-the-box Mule for retail and just plug into Mule for retail and everything's done, because there's so much variation between companies out there. Other questions? I know some of this can get a little technical, so feel free to ask the stupid questions.
So if you had a company that was willing to take the risk of having all systems sourced by the same software company in the name of integration, then is this company in your market? Would you be able to service it?
I don't know there's any company out there that can do that today. So yes, once upon a time, you might try to build, again, entirely on Oracle, entirely on SAP. I don't know that anybody that is trying to do that today. Because so much of the power of SaaS applications are people who have gone out there and solved specific problems. So what Daniel and I were working on at Responses, it was a piece of software that was great for B2C marketers. And the plethora of SaaS applications are all solving really well various bits and pieces of the ecosystem out there, far better than any one company can do in aggregate. But in short, they wouldn't be a customer for us if they did exist, because we need to serve the companies that have the desire to innovate, the desire to change, the desire to do things faster, and probably that company would not be one of those. Yeah.
So you mentioned developmental toolkits. I'm assuming your clients have developers that are going to use MuleSoft to build their own applications. So MuleSoft is really just like an API on top of an API, because those developers would be using Workday anyway, but now they're going to use MuleSoft connect to Workday.
Yeah, so it's sort of. So what his question is, a lot of these companies, every modern company now has APIs that they make available. The challenge is that even those tend to be very hard to work with. So Salesforce.com has multiple APIs. And as I understand it, the documentation for those APIs is about this thick. So if you're trying to get just some pretty simple piece of data out of Salesforce, if you want to get a purchase date for a customer, what you do is you would use our Salesforce connector to plug into the Salesforce API, focus just on getting that type of information, so just purchase date, and publish that in a way that was much simpler and much easier to use. You might also choose to, if you told everybody to connect right to the Salesforce API, you don't know who's using it, you don't know how much they're hitting it, it's much harder to govern and control it. Whereas if they go through a MuleSoft API along the way, you now have kind of put a door in place to be able to track what's happening there. And so for those who are interested in security, one of the big benefits of this is you actually can get security at every node and every layer of this application network to varying degrees. Yeah?
How does this fit into kind of on-prem versus SaaS? Because I know like a lot, like AWS and stuff like that has a lot of different APIs and different services that you can do, or like database as a service and stuff like that. And so is that part of this, or is this solution more tailored for on-prem solutions that are kind of spread throughout the organization and hard to put the piece together?
So one of the things he's talking about is that, as you guys know, every company almost every company is moving to the cloud in some way or another. And that means that in the interim, they've got some stuff they built that was on-premise. They've got the new thing that's in the cloud. We love that problem because it creates complexity. Rarely, you're not going to be able to shut off the thing that was on-premise and then flip the switch over to the things that are in the cloud. You're usually going to be running them in parallel, and it's more and more things to connect. So one of the things that's very unique about us is when you're running the software, you can deploy it in your own servers. You can deploy it in our AWS-hosted kind of managed instance. You can deploy it in something like Pivotal Cloud Foundry. You can deploy it wherever you want. And it works very well with anything that's in the cloud or anything on-premise. So a lot of our legacy competitors, they're folks like Tibco or Oracle or IBM WebSphere, was sort of an earlier generation of the software. They're just never architected to work well with stuff in the cloud. They really struggle to do that. Similarly, there's some other things that don't work with things that are on-premise very well. And we actually are really good at sitting in the middle of that. And we think that companies are going to be hybrid for a long time to come, and we're pretty good at managing within that.
One of the challenges that exists and creates this almost like duct taping mentality of systems is the not being able to account for things that you can't foresee. So it's easy if you know all the possibilities that you need. You know, if you knew problems in existence with tools in existence to account for those and build a system that can service kind of each one of them. How do you guys take kind of uncertainty of what may be next to stay consistent, like when that next evolution comes, when there's a new introduction of the cloud or a new introduction of mobile?
Yeah, well, again, we also love uncertainty. That's actually another great thing for us. That as a better diagram than this one to show it. But imagine if you wanted to swap out Salesforce in this diagram for Dynamic CRM. It's kind of as easy as you unplug Salesforce, you plug in Dynamics. There's one layer that has to change, but everything else downstream of that doesn't. And so it's a little hard to conceptualize in this diagram. But because we try to say, okay, what's the data that you care about that you're getting in and out of Salesforce, and pretty quickly turn that into a generic form that can be used by anything in the company. Once you make that change, you're not touching everything else around it. So it makes it much easier. Again, kind of the whole goal here is to have an environment that's like Lego bricks, where you can plug and unplug the Lego bricks, rather than having something that's kind of big monster where everything's glued together really tightly.
So then, kind of along the same vein, what are the potential limitations? Like in 10 years, are we going to have a slide that says like, oh my God, APIs, they made such a mess, it's not working for how business shifted? Like, what are those potential limitations?
Yeah, let me just show you one more concept, which I think is on my next slide or two here, and that will tee up a little bit of that, and then let me try to make sure I'm answering your question. Actually talked about this. So one of the other interesting pieces, we've talked a lot about software. There's actually a big human component to this, which is just giving people the software tools doesn't mean that they're going to do the right things with it. Same thing is going back to that PowerPoint analogy. If your marketing department publishes some great PowerPoint templates and they put it on a corporate intranet and they never tell anybody about it and they never talk you through how to use it, it's not going to get much adoption. Same thing with this stuff, where one of the things we do when we engage customers is we're very focused on building what we call a center for enablement, which is, think of that in simple terms as, hey, if central IT has got to learn how to build things that are highly reusable, there needs to be somebody that's kind of helping them think about, hey, that thing's not actually as easy to use as you thought it is. Not actually as well documented as you thought it is. Here's what people really want. And similarly, working with the teams who are consuming it to say, hey, before you go build your own thing, have you checked this repository, which is also part of our product, to see if there's something out there you can just reuse instead of going off and building your own thing? And if nothing exists, well, no problem, we'll go build something new, that's fine. But it's trying to create much more collaboration between central IT, folks who are out kind of dispersed across the business, and any innovation teams you have. Often these guys are just not talking to each other. It gives them a means and a mechanism to have the conversation. So one of the risks for us is, if we go in and we sell a couple of guys some great technology, but the organization doesn't understand, it isn't bought in, especially at the very senior levels of what we're trying to do and how to make that happen, it can fall flat. So there needs to be some real intentionality in this really winds up amounting to some real organizational change within the IT organization, where they start to operate and serve their customers in a different way. It doesn't have to happen in a big bang fashion. It can be bit by bit. But it does wind up meaning that people really do think and operate in a pretty different format. So to go back to your question, I think we're pretty able to deal with kind of any technology that's out there. Certainly, maybe there's going to be an easier to use version of an API that comes out. Okay, we'd want to adapt to that. I think the big thing is going to be it's about adoption onto this stuff. And can you move beyond the technology to follow the appropriate practice? as we sell to our customers, we need to be very close. We have to have a point of view. We are leading them. We're showing them how to do this. HSBC is a very large customer of ours, and there's a meeting we had with them that I was a part of where they had their global CIO meeting with our president and CEO, and they're having a couple issues. And they said, guys, you didn't raise these issues to us soon enough. And our team was in there working with their counterparts and saying, hey, I think we got a problem. And their counterpart said, don't worry about it, it's going to be fine. We want to do things the way we've always done it. And the feedback from the senior executive levels was, you guys should have gone around them, come to me, there's a problem, you should have told us about it. So it's really interesting from a, I haven't told you much about my role there, but it's working a lot with our field teams in terms of how we sell and how we engage customers. We have to be in a position of leading, having a point of view, guiding folks forward to find the right solution and do it in the right way. That's part of what our customers are paying us for, and it's a big part of how they actually ultimately achieve these outcomes.
So if I understand, MuleSoft acts as kind of a hub between systems. Now, is that mostly for reporting, or is it a site inventory as well? Does it act? I know there are solutions that say act as a clearinghouse. Let's say you have a product in your inventory, in your ERP system, you have 2 units in stock, and you have it listed on Amazon, eBay, Jack.com, and it kind of makes sure that you don't double sell those units. And it is more than just it does more than just a simple systems integration. Yeah. Does MuleSoft take that over as well?
It sounds like that may be a very specialized system for inventory management. You know, we wouldn't be as specialized. We're a very horizontal system. But the notion of, you know, you can apply this to almost any IT challenge you have.
When you're working with these really big organizations that have huge IT teams like Unilever, we were talking about building connections on top of bigger systems that are used by a lot of different folks like Salesforce. But a lot of these big guys have, I would imagine, very customized databases that they have sort of built up. And when you're looking at, when you're selling them, this whole ecosystem, I would imagine that it takes a lot of man effort that's not very repeatable amongst all these big customers. And I did notice that you guys have sort of spun off this professional services and growth aspect of your business. And I'm just curious whether you see that as a big core part of your business going forward, whether you're just really going to have to hold hands and build all these custom integrations for these databases. And do you guys come up against data lakes, for example, when you're selling into these big organizations?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say we've spun off a services organization. We do have a services organization that supports our customers. And there are a lot of software companies out there that are trying to maximize revenue from their services organizations. They want to do it all. Our approach is to use our services team to provide the kind of the most value-added guidance to our customers. The hands on keyboard, just go build stuff, we use partners to go do that. So as you can imagine, in sort of in the thought process and how do you build this stuff out, having somebody that has done it before and understands some of the best practices is quite valuable. So that's where our services team comes in. But we're not trying to be in there and do all the work. There certainly is. I mean, just the nature of this beast. There is software doesn't do everything. There's absolutely code that has to be written and folks that have to go build things using our toolkit. But we try to make that as easy as possible and use our internal resources at the highest level.
I think a little bit coming off of that, I noticed a lot of the examples you've used with Unilever, just these big Fortune 500 companies that want their systems to be nimble, but need all this help in order to get there. I'm curious to see your play in some of the smaller, mid-sized companies where they are now living in cloud. They've started their organization in cloud and mobile.
Yeah.
Do they eventually get there and that's the bet, or do you feel like there's still a lot of demand for MuleSoft services?
Yeah, well, two things. I didn't put a logo slide in here, but as you look at our customer base, you see everything from some of the most innovative, high-growth companies, New Relic, Splunk, Salesforce, Workday, to companies that have been around for a long, long time. And so both of them have these challenges of, one way or another, you've got a bunch of systems that have to work well together. And let me actually, I wanted to close, and this is let me play this video from a smaller customers, and then we'll take any other questions from there. This is, anybody ever eaten at a Buffalo Wild Wings?
Buffalo Wild Wings' mission is spear wings in sports. We think of our customers as fans, and it's all about that. It's all around the fan experience. I'm a fan. Most people are fans, so I like the intersection of fandom and technology at Buffalo Wild Wings. A restaurant can have somewhere in the vicinity of 24 to 32 taps, and a manager has control over a certain number of those. So definitely with the craft beer phenomenon, we know that the requests have increased dramatically from 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Previously, the general manager could see sales for the beers to try to understand what's selling well and what's not, but it was not an easy process. It would take a day, sometimes more than that, to get to that data. MuleSoft has allowed us to integrate multiple data types and put those in front of a general manager. Now they can see that data within an hour. We're excited to use MuleSoft and partner with MuleSoft because we're going to have to connect a bunch of different technologies to enhance that fan experience in the restaurant. We implemented a solution, a new application called Smart Bar, where a general manager can log in and manage their inventory of tapped beers, request new ones, as well as setting up the menu items so they show up on the POS terminals of the restaurant. All of that is automated now with integrations to various systems for requesting and approving. One thing we're really focused on in our strategy is providing more delivery service. We don't have our own delivery service, so we have to work with a lot of partners. We build these reusable APIs. After those are there, it should be a matter of weeks to stand up a new delivery partner instead of months or quarters to do that. There's no way we could gather all that information without a tool like MuleSoft. MuleSoft to me is both a tool and a partner. We need to create reusable integrations, reusable APIs to connect various applications, and the team has been great in helping us understand the technology. I do feel that MuleSoft genuinely wants us to succeed. We're reducing our cycle times probably by a third. MuleSoft is the heart of how we make applications talk to each other.
So, monitoring how much beer is sold every day, also a good application. But I think, just to kind of close this out a little bit, for those of you who understand the technology, there's more we can talk about. There's some interesting stuff. But for those of you who aren't as close to it, I think the key things are that this world is changing a lot. And having the right infrastructure in these companies makes a huge difference to you as managers. You focus on this example of restaurant managers just trying to figure out what do they put in their menu, what do they order, and what quantities. This stuff has an impact. The more that you can understand about when you run into these walls of, sorry, we can't get you what you need, I'd challenge that assumption a bit and push back a little bit. Start to learn more about how that data is actually stored and managed, what the process is for surfacing it. If you're in a position where you're trying to drive that business, almost all of you will likely be in a position someday where to get something done that matters to you, whatever it is, you're gonna need to tell your IT organization to go faster, and that it's not acceptable that it takes 6 months or a year or 2 years to get that thing done. Your ability to build a business that is able to move faster and change faster than other folks out there is going to be a real source of advantage. And having even a basic working knowledge of how this happens, where the bottlenecks are, how you can relieve those bottlenecks, I think can be pretty helpful. And obviously, for those of you interested in careers in software companies that are in and around this, again, there's just a ton of change going on in kind of the heart of IT these days, and there's a lot of money to be made there. Other questions? Elva.
Now, I'm sure I just want to understand the sales cycle a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So these companies are having, tens of, 20s of companies are coming to them saying they can do exactly what you've done for Buffalo Wild Wings.
Yeah.
How does MuleSoft stand out? How does, what is what's what's the trigger point to say they're going to go with you rather than someone else?
Yeah. So we will typically either have people coming to us with a particular project that they're trying to do that they want to do faster and more easily, or we'll be going outbound to fairly senior folks in an organization. Our best customer is somebody that understands both the technology side and the business pains that company is facing and has some frustration that they can't move fast enough. We'll help them think through, everybody has a default way that they were planning to go attack this stuff. We'll help them recognize where that default way maybe has some gaps, where it could be improved, start to get them to think in these terms broadly. And once they really have this vision of wanting to build an application network, it is usually a pretty easy decision to go with MuleSoft at that point, that we are quite differentiated in our ability to deliver upon this vision.
Yeah. The way that you structure, you're in a very good position to understand what value the customers are getting from each data source. Do you inform them of that? Because then you start taking away the nodes that are driving the attractiveness of your solution.
So we won't look at the data itself. We for security purposes, we won't look at the actual packets of data that pass through our system. What we are able to do is understand some of the metadata around those data flows, and there's some pretty interesting information contained in that. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Then you're not informing the company from which data sources they're getting the most.
We would help them have visibility into how is data flowing within that organization, where's there the most traffic, those types of questions. In terms of value, of which data has the most value to an end user, because we're not looking at the data itself, we're probably not in a position to answer that question.
And you're not also looking at the user usage of that data?
Usage and traffic, we sure could be.